people remember things not from stats and bullet points and quotes. They remember things from stories. It's how we're built. Storytelling is the name of the game. Podcasting, marketing, running a business, trying to get somebody to do something, talking to vendors, like storytelling is the game.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
Hey, podcaster. It's your host, Adam Adams, and we are talking with Anthony Franco today here on the show. He's got a podcast with a co-host named Chris, and they help founders. So I think we'll actually ask Anthony, make sure that this is right. It sounds like he does a little bit of consulting on the side for entrepreneurs, and that's just their passion. So they decided to put together this podcast and be able to serve those people with the blind spots that they get to. As we are recording now, there's about 75 episodes, and they're building strong over the last few months. So they're going to keep going pretty strong. In this episode, we'll talk a little bit about the cadence, how they started, why they started. We'll talk about logos, what did they think of for logos, even a little bit of AI for their show notes. So we'll get his experience with Chris and what they've done and how they've done it, so that if you can kind of see a way that one of these things helps you, you'll be able to get a little bit of value. Additionally, I might ask him some questions about just being a founder, the kind of stuff that he does to support other people, what he's seen and why they're doing some of that content. And I think that might help you because you are a podcaster and probably a podcaster with a business attached to your show. So let's dive in. Anthony, it's good to have you.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
Let's go way back. I think it's like 6 or 8 months, something like that. You decided you were going to have a podcast. I'm curious what happened before that. Had people been telling you to do this? Have you been thinking about doing this? Or did you just think about it one day and literally start it the next day?
Neither of those. So the way it started, Chris, my co-host, runs a very popular founder community here in Colorado. It's called Denver Founders. 12,000 members. Like, it has a great following. And Chris and I have been good friends in the entrepreneurial community for quite some time. He was actually one of the original folks that started Denver Startup Week. So just really well dialed in. I'm dialed in, but not as well as him. And I was at one of his events, and I've always had this itch to, like, my craft is entrepreneurship. I don't have hobbies. I don't play tennis. I don't play golf. It's all entrepreneurship. It's what I spend my spare time in. And so I was talking to Chris about this, and I said, eventually I want to write a book about how to be an entrepreneur and cover all of the crazy things that we have to cover as entrepreneurs that hit us for the first time, so that it's a reference manual. So you flip to a book, like, what do I do how do I build the mission statement? Like, you flip to the chapter. Instead of writing 10 books, you just flip to here's the mental model, here's the generic things, and here's a bunch of other books that you can go read. But I don't want to write a book. So I said, how about we do a podcast that's kind of a reference manual for founders? And he was in before I finished the sentence. He was like, I'm in, let's do it. So that's really how the podcast started. Didn't have a name, we just kind of had this mission to just help founders. And maybe 3 weeks later, we filmed our first episode on building a noble cause.
Okay. So you weren't one of the people that were planning on doing this, wanting to do this, or were told to do this for 3 or 4 or 5 years, and then you started. So I'm curious, what is different about that? Because I've got a listener, at least one person right now, who does not have a podcast. They've probably been thinking of having the podcast for a year, 2 or 3 or 4 years. They've probably been told by their friends, their family, you should do a podcast, you'd be so good. But they did it the slow way. They still haven't done it. They're still kind of learning. So what's the difference between you, who had it launched in 3 weeks, versus some of the folks that take a year or 2 or 3?
Delusion.
Okay, delusion.
Delusion that it was easy, right? It's the entrepreneurial gene, right? That I was born with. ready, fire, aim. And that's kind of how entrepreneurs operate. A lot of them, not all of them. So Chris and I decided we want to do it, and we just kind of, we didn't know what we were getting into, so therefore probably was easier for us to start than if you're really contemplating it and planning it and thinking it out and strategizing it and how we're going to build it. We didn't care about any of that. We didn't care about driving leads to a top of funnel. We didn't care about really building an audience yet. We just wanted to produce some great content and serve entrepreneurs. So it was kind of easier to start from that perspective. But at the same time, we didn't know what we didn't know, and it made it easier.
Yeah. So what do you think you could share about that process as in terms of things that you learned the quick way?
Goes for podcasting. I think general entrepreneurial advice, start. Just start. If you're not embarrassed by your first episode, you waited too long. Like, just go start, have some conversations, bring your friends and family on if you're looking for guests, and just figure it out as you're going. Nobody's going to watch your first 10 episodes anyway. So I think what I confirmed was that starting is the hardest part. And then you just get into a rhythm and you start doing it, and know that you're going to change how long the podcasts are, the script, how you do it, who's going to be on. Those things are going to change and constantly iterate. You're going to constantly iterate on. So my first piece of advice is just go. Just get out and do it, and then figure it out.
That was a lot. So your main thought is to just don't wait, just get started. And I want to think out loud myself, just for the listener's sake as well, that I think there is two ways to do it. And there's two polar opposite ways that you can do it. And then there's like a middle ground as well. One is you wait and wait and wait. You think that it needs to be completely perfect. You think that you need to be the best interviewer ever. You think you need to have the top guests in the planet, and you don't know how to get that person that you know that is famous. And so you just never start a podcast. And then there's starting it and not having a plan, but at least having it published. And then there's in the middle, it would be like trying to have some idea, some plan. And I think that if you are listening to this, you got to be comfortable understanding, hey, what's my style? Do I want to just start it and just do it for fun, have it out there? Or do I want to never do it because if I did it, it had to be perfect, or somewhere in the middle? So just be thinking about that.
I wouldn't argue with any of that, Adam.
Anthony, I got a question. So you guys started this podcast, and I'm curious what parts are hard and what parts you're making easy. In the green room, you mentioned some stuff about not editing the podcast, and I kind of want to go in that direction and see what is it that you're doing to make this something that gets published regularly.
Yeah, so we look, because this is kind of a side project for us, not a full-time, we couldn't dedicate hours and hours and hours a week to it. I knew that editing a podcast can be exceptionally time-consuming. That's where everybody falls down. The podcasters that I know, they'll tell me, I started it and I stopped because it was expensive to edit or time-consuming because I had to do it, and we didn't get the traction we thought. So you kind of almost lose momentum because you have to spend so much time editing things that it's like, I don't really want to edit it. So we want to go live. And the reason why we wanted to go live is not because live matters, is because it forces us not to edit. Like once it's out there, it's published. So you see us warts and all, which is kind of the vibe of the podcast anyway. So it's supposed to be blue collar. So we wanted to save time by not having to edit. I'll stop there. I can also talk about our pre-production, but our post-production was very consciously no post-production. Let's just get it out so we don't have to spend a ton of time editing it.
I like that. And I'm curious, how you go about doing that. So you jump on, is it Facebook Live? Do you use Streamyard? Do you use
Yeah, we use Streamyard. Yeah.
Is
Tactically, we use
YouTube?
Streamyard.
Because I don't think you would be teaching me something if you can go live on Apple Podcast, because I thought you had to upload something. So tell me the process. Let's talk pre-production and post-production.
Yeah. So pre-production, essentially, so we're using PodMatch for guests, which has actually been fantastic to find us really good guests, authors, experts. It's been great. Even the CEO of PodMatch was on our podcast talking about earned media, so it was great.
Nice.
And I have a service called cal.com, and cal.com allows me to schedule guests. It's a lot like Calendly. I have 200 episodes outlined in a Google Sheet, and I've connected the How to Founder website with the Google Sheet and put links in that Google Sheet. So I have the Google Sheet and an iframe that has all the episodes. Guests can come onto that Google Sheet, click on the topic they want, and it jumps them right into cal.com and allows them to schedule on our calendar with the topic that they're interested in. So that's
let me ask on that.
Yeah.
So you try to have around 200 episode ideas in one place on a Google Sheet, and then you take your potential guest to this Google Sheet, and they take an idea. You might have one that says, how do you file taxes? Who knows? You might do that. You might not. But you got an episode idea, how to file taxes, and a CPA jumps on. He's like, yeah, I can tackle that one. And so he clicks it, and that's what you talk about. And then that goes down to 199 episode ideas.
Exactly right. You got it. You nailed it.
All right. What else?
So once they schedule, they get on our calendar, and we're booked out till July. So the process is working out pretty well.
For the listener, that's about 5 months ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. We're booked out 5 months ahead. It's automatically in our calendars. We've got it all scheduled. Then about a week or 2 weeks ahead of the go live date, I craft show notes. And show notes, I have fairly lengthy chat GPT prompt that I'll use. Yeah. So I'm immersed in AI and actually have a couple clients that are in AI. So I know AI pretty well. And I know, and the art of using ChatGPT or Claude or whatever in a interesting way is building a prompt. So I have a prompt that's 3 pages long. It talks about who the prompter is, right? It goes through here's who you are, here's who we are, here's the vibe of the podcast, here's the goal of the output. And then I go through and say, here's what you're going to do. You're going to create show notes for us. Here's the section of the show notes that we need. And here's the formatting that we want out of it. And after this prompt, I'm going to give you a title and a guest, and you're going to create all the show notes for me. And then I put the title and guest in, and it creates show notes. I would say the show notes are probably 65% good. I don't edit the show notes. I just put it in a file that Chris and I share, and we skip the 35% that isn't, because it's not being published. And then we do a little, we grab, so once we have the show notes, we create the broadcast, the schedule on Streamyard. And that pre-publishes to YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And then when we go live, it also goes live on X. So we go live on X, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Immediately following the show, I download the episode and publish it on Spotify, which broadcasts it to Apple Podcasts and iHeartRadio.
Okay. So your hosting platform is Spotify.
Streamyard. Oh, sorry. So yes, Spotify is the host. I use Spotify.
Okay.
What's the name of it? For creators. Spotify for creators.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
So once I download the transcripts and the episode.
How do you get the transcripts? Is that just from Streamyard?
Yeah, it comes from Streamyard, and they're pretty good.
They don't charge any extra.
Yeah, they don't charge any extra.
And what do you do with that? Are you
the transcripts I put into the transcripts I put into another prompt that I've written that helps me write social posts and a blog post.
Okay.
And then we publish the blog post as well.
I'm cutting you off, but does the transcript also help you with the show notes when you're writing the show notes, or do you only give it those other prompts that you were talking about before?
Sorry, the show notes are pre-episode, transcripts is post, so I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question.
Okay, when you write the show notes for a new show,
Mhm.
you write them prior to recording the episode.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. It's
That
kind of like
confuses
a
me, and
script.
I think we could talk about this for a sec because, I get on with you, Anthony, and I ask certain questions, and then it kind of opens up new ideas, new things, new curiosities. Well, I think, hey, what is the listener wondering right here? Oh, he just said this. Did he trail off there, or should we talk more about that? And so, like for my team, they do take, so we do editing of people's shows and stuff. They do take the transcript and they upload that into ChatGPT with just similar to what you have, like a whole bunch of prompts,
Right.
but it has the transcript, and then it'll, for example, take the top 3 to 6 ideas that happen to come through with the podcast. And I never know what those are going to be. Sometimes I could have an idea of 1 or 2 of them. I might even think of 3, but not use 1 or 2 of them. And so, yeah, talk to us about that. I'm curious because I think that the listener might want to hear both sides of it.
Yeah, that's so. What you're talking about, what you do, we do. So, I my first project in ChatGPT is called Podcaster, which all I put in is a title, a guest, and their bio, and it writes out. Essentially, it writes. Well, first of all, it creates the opening hook. We tell a little story about the topic, like. So I'll give you an example. I have one pulled up here. It's called. So the last episode we just did was called "Speeding Up Decision Making." And it wrote the hook, which is basically an opening story that helps us talk about the topic. It gives us historical context for the topic that we're going to talk on.
Cool.
In this circumstance, it was a story. It was a short 200 word or 200 character story about Formula One team, and then it gives it the prompt returns a shortened intro for the guest.
Yeah.
And then it gives me some stats that we can quote during the podcast for that may be relevant. Oftentimes we skip the stats. And then it gives me some potential questions that we can ask. We only use those if the conversation stalls, right? So the way you run your podcast is exactly how Chris and I run it. It's like we let the conversation lead to where it is, also trying to guide it back to the topic. And then we go through a speed round. The show notes gives me the speed round. During the episode, I'm taking notes to do exactly what you're talking about, which is summarizing the great points that we got.
Mm-hmm.
And then I kind of read those notes at the ending of the episode.
Oh, wow. You do it live.
Yes.
You and Chris are bouncing ideas. You're going live. You're on multiple platforms. I think you said X and Facebook and maybe YouTube and LinkedIn and possibly Insta. So you're live in a bunch of places. You're both on there. You prompt something to help you figure out a good hook for your podcast.
Right.
And a couple of questions in case it stalls, as well as a couple of statistics that help to add more backbone to those points.
Statistics, quotes, philosophers, all of that stuff. Right.
And now you're going through an episode pretty organically and trying to keep it on topic.
Yes.
And in the middle of all this, you find out from ChatGPT somehow, and I want you to explain this a little bit better, at least for me, you figure out while you're still doing it, how to wrap it up. And then you send this to ChatGPT while you're on recording. And how does that help you?
No, so during live, we're not using ChatGPT at all.
Okay.
I'm taking bullet point notes during the conversation. Like these, we call them founder fundamentals. I'm writing down the founder fundamentals that I want to wrap up the episode with.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
So, that follows a formula that we share a lot on this podcast. And there's 2 ways to think about it. One is the hook, the story, the offer. So the beginning is you get their attention, and then in the middle, you give them the content with stories. And at the end, you tell them what they should do next. And another way to look at it is tell them what you're going to tell them. So start off by giving an idea, then you tell them with a story, and then you tell them what you just taught them.
Right.
By wrapping things up as you do So you're taking notes as you go. You're putting it somewhere on a notepad, or maybe it's wherever. And then you have a chance at the end to be like, this is what we learned. And that helps the listener understand, hey, yeah, there's a lot of content in here. I'm glad I listened to this episode. Does that sound correct?
That sounds right. It also gives the transcript. Once I take the transcript and put it into my other ChatGPT prompt, which is, I call it the chapter and post prompt.
Okay.
I remind it, hey, by the way, the bumper stickers, the goods parts are also mentioned at the end. Those are the things we want you to cover in the blog post.
Yeah. Good stuff. Okay. With pre and post production, is there any other thing that you learned the hard way that you could help the listener with right now? Or anything that you're doing a special way that you think other podcasters are missing?
Well, so I found the hardest part of writing. Look, I'm terrible at writing hooks and titles. Terrible at it. And we had a podcast guest on that gave me something that was kind of a game changer for us.
Okay.
For me. And the game changer was, she said, write your title or hook as though you can. So use the prompt, get your listener to imagine that they are committing one of the 7 deadly sins, and write a hook based on that. And it really changed the game for us on our prompts. It doesn't produce 10 out of 10 great hooks, but it produces 3 out of 10, which is enough that we just pick one that we like and go with it. So, if you're talking about pride, you talk about pride is one of the 7 deadly sins. It'll write a hook that says that gets the founder to imagine them achieving a goal.
Yeah.
Or gaining wealth, right? If it's sloth, it'll say relax on the beach. If you choose these, so it'll give you great hooks, and those hooks really get the listener to imagine themselves committing one of the 7 deadly sins.
Cool.
And it writes a great hook. So anyway, that's something I learned along the way.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad that you shared that. Let's do a quick break. When we come back, I've got a couple of questions for you. One is, I want to understand some big mistakes podcasters are making, and I've got 3 more queued up. We'll be right back.
Hey, my friend, as you know, this episode is sponsored by my company, growyourshow.com. We want you to be able to have the best tools at your disposal without costing you a whole arm and a leg. So right now you can get a free list of vetted equipment that, like mics, mixers, webcams, sound treatment, editing software, everything that you need. I created the whole PDF with direct purchase links just to save you time and money, to help it be more convenient for you. So this free PDF will help you skip all the guesswork. If it's on there, it's vetted and approved by yours truly. And if it's not on there, it's probably not worth the money. So go ahead and get yours at growyourshow.com/PDF. Let's get back into the show.
We're back with Anthony Franco, and here's where I want to start. I want to understand first, not necessarily one of the biggest mistakes podcasters make when they launch their own show, but I think something you and I talked about would be valuable to our listener right now. And that is what you don't like to happen as a guest.
Yeah. So I do guesting. Obviously, I do guesting as well.
Yeah.
I think maybe it's my personality, but I think that podcasters that want to be very rigid and formal and not conversational, really constrains how you can have a conversation. So I notice a lot of podcasters, especially ones more that are just starting out, that have this very rigid structure that they want you to follow. And I think it builds not a great podcast episode. It's not entertaining. It's not compelling. It's not engaging. So that's one thing. Another thing that I notice podcasters make mistakes on is, they'll invite me to a show, and then you go look at their page and they're super inconsistent on how they post.
You mean that they might publish twice one week and then skip a few weeks or something?
Or they haven't published an episode in a month.
Yeah.
And I think consistency is 100%, like it's 90% of the game. You have to have good content. That's table stakes. But if you're not consistent, then why are you doing this?
Yeah.
Another thing that I'll notice is if you're hosting, we don't have this problem, but I would say get your episode out as quick as you can. I was just on another podcast earlier this week, and They're like, okay, so we'll be publishing this in May. It's like, oh, okay. I won't even remember the conversation in May.
Yeah. So that bothers you when you are a guest on someone's show and they are scheduled out pretty far. You're like, no, I want that to be out a little bit sooner.
Yeah. So I think out a little bit sooner helps. Also, if you're having an author on and they're promoting a book, they want that episode out timely so that they can
yesterday.
Right. Yeah. It's so I think there's an advantage of speed. Definitely think there's an advantage of speed.
I got 3 rapid fire questions.
Okay.
Your answer doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to have too much detail, but let's see where you go with these 3. What do you think separates a good podcast from a great podcast in terms of branding and positioning? As a founder, what separates good versus great for branding and positioning?
Mission.
Love it. Okay. How about this? How important is it to niche when you start a podcast? And how could podcasters find a better, unique angle?
I think it's very important to niche, and I'm doing a terrible job at it. Entrepreneurship is a really broad subject. So I would say it's really important to niche, and I could take my own advice on that.
Okay. Awesome. Last question is, how do you think that podcasters should use their voice or storytelling to keep listeners engaged in an episode? Whether, because I know you do solo episodes and you also do interview episodes. So you can answer that question from either angle. How should a podcaster think of using their own voice and storytelling style to keep the listener engaged?
Storytelling is you have to get good at storytelling. People remember things not from stats and bullet points and quotes. They remember things from stories. It's how we're built. Storytelling is the name of the game. Podcasting, marketing, running a business, trying to get somebody to do something, talking to vendors, like storytelling is the game. Read as many books on storytelling as you possibly can. The other thing that I see, and you also said about voice, and I think voice is really, really important. This word authentic gets thrown around a lot. What does authentic mean?
I think it means you to the core. I think
exactly right.
Here's an example that I think not everybody has to listen to this advice, but it's like if you cuss, if foul language is part of your thing, and you're doing a podcast and you're specifically trying to hold it back, like that, people I think feel that. I think people feel the absence of you not being your whole self. And yes, I believe that people are going to be offended if you cuss, some of them. But I also think that your person, they follow you, they resonate with you. So it's just a random part. Like this person is overly excited. This person is middle excited. This person is boring as hell. Or this person uses this much language. This person never uses the language. It's like, as long as I feel that you are who you are, it draws me to you. But if I sense that you are trying to be something you're not, more excited,
that's it. You nailed
whatever, then I get a weird spidey sense that just says, I don't know what's wrong with this guy, or I don't know what's wrong with this girl. I can't resonate with this person. So
I totally agree. 100%. You nailed it. No notes.
No notes. No notes. Well, let's do what you do on your podcast and go through some notes that we took during this conversation. So Anthony and his partner, Chris, from Denver, they both help founders. They're part of these groups, or they are leaders of these groups. And they said one day, hey, I want to start a podcast. They got it done 3 weeks later. So he said, it's okay, he said, ready, fire, aim. It's okay to make those changes, get started, and things are going to change. He talked about the first 10 episodes. He talked about the first 3 episodes. He talked about the very first episode. And just to be able to be that person who can get over it. We talked about his pre-production and post-production process, talking about cal.com, which is a calendar link, how he always has those 200 episodes ready on a Google Sheet. And he also talked about that one thing that he learned along the way that he shared with you, which is when you write your hook, and you can prompt ChatGPT to help you with this. When you write your hook at the beginning of your podcast, you can try to get your listener to imagine that they are committing one of these 7 deadly sins so that they run away from it, so that they say, I've got to listen to this, I've got to learn from this. And also, Anthony talked a little bit about a few tips. I've got 3 in front of me now. When you are going to be a guest on somebody else's show, or when you're going to have guests on your show, how do you think through this? One of the tips that he had was to make it conversational rather than robotic. The next one was to be consistent. Publishing, for example, at least once a week at the same time. Now, Anthony, he publishes 3 or 4 episodes a week. But I'm talking at the minimum for you to be consistent. You want to publish once a week at the same time. Anthony didn't mention this on the podcast, but it does 2 things. It adds credibility to the podcast playing platform, which means there's an algorithm built into the podcast playing platform, whether that's Spotify or Apple or one of the others, which sees that you're consistent. And so it's more likely to put you in front of more people rather than block you from more people. What advantage would the podcast playing platform have to put an inconsistent podcast in front of somebody? Because they wouldn't know if somebody would stay on their platform. They want people to stay on the platform, so that consistency automatically triggers an algorithm that allows them to put you in front of more people. But it also helps your listener. It also keeps them coming back for more, especially when you do what Anthony does, where it's 3 or more episodes every week. Then you can really get value. And third is to get those episodes out quickly. Now, I think that is something people could argue, people would fight, because it's nice to have a good bank account of episodes so that you can get sick. I had a friend, by the way, Anthony. He got COVID. Now, here's story time, because Anthony talked about stories being important. So here's story time. I had a client during 2020. He went to Hawaii and he ended up getting COVID while he was there. So it started off where he had to take a couple weeks off of work, but it was fine because he had a couple weeks of podcasts. But he also got COVID on this thing. So he got the flu or whatever. And that took him out for another 10 days. And he couldn't even fly home yet to get to his recording studio because he was isolated. And then whenever he got back home, after he healed, he had a random emergency gallbladder surgery. Now, I don't know if they removed it or if they worked on it, but these things can happen where it's back-to-back things topping one after another that make it really challenging. So me and a few clients are like, I want to be ahead 5 months. I want to have a savings account. That means that if I get sick, if I go on vacation, if I want to take from Thanksgiving to Christmas off, I can, or Thanksgiving to New Year's off, I can just let those episodes come out and I'm fine because I've got a savings account, and that's going to help me keep consistent. But with Anthony on the other side, also sharing that if you get on that podcast and it takes 5 months for it to come out, then how are you going to feel? Some of that stuff might be old news. You wanted to promote something and you no longer can. Or, hey, it finally went up and it's like, wait, what podcast was I on? Anthony said, I don't even know if I remember that conversation. What podcast was I on? Are you likely to share that episode? If you don't even hardly remember the conversation, probably not. So you're going to have to think between that. How far out can I be? I'm curious, you, Anthony. What would be the most amount of time that you, as a guest, would feel happy with that host publishing? So 5 months is too long. 1 day is amazing. But what's the most amount that you're like, oh, yeah, that's fine? Is it like 6 weeks or something else?
I tend to be more urgent. So I would say a month.
Okay.
See, a month seems like a long time to me.
30 days max, right?
Look, you're asking me my opinion, right?
Yes.
A month seems like a long time.
Okay.
You make a really good point, though, on the fact that, having a bank, one thing that I have an advantage of is a co-host. So if I'm sick, Chris covers, and if Chris is sick, I cover. So we can't, if we have a guest, we still run with the guest, and then we have some coverage there. But you make a really great point of having a bank of episodes to keep up with the consistency piece of it.
Perfect. Well, hey, to the listener, the podcast, How to Founder, the link is down in the show notes right now. If you want to get more of Anthony's bio, like find out more about him, his website, social media that he wanted you to have, it's already down in the show notes. Go ahead and scroll down. Thecal.com is a resource that he mentioned. I've done others. I've used Calendly like he mentioned, but cal.com, we'll put that link down in the show notes to make sure that if you want to check it out and see if that's something for you, then you can grab that as well. And I will see you on the next episode.
You're not alone if you're ready to either get your very first affordable microphone or if you're ready to upgrade your equipment to some legit podcasting studio equipment. Because on all of the forums over the last few months, I'm seeing this all the time. Even my own personal clients that work with my team, they're ready to get that next microphone. They're asking us for it. Additionally, when I'm on discovery calls with potential clients, they're always asking for this stuff. Hey, what mic do you recommend? Hey, what lighting do you recommend? What webcam should I be using? So many questions. And so what we did, my whole team has put together a PDF so that if you're one of those people who is looking to either get your very first affordable microphone, or if you're ready to upgrade your equipment to more professional podcast studio equipment, whether it's soundproofing or whatever, we've got you covered by going to growyourshow.com/PDF. And you can download the PDF for free, or right there on the webpage is everything that you would have, and you don't need to download the PDF. Either way, just go to growyourshow.com/PDF, which will put you to the podcasting equipment that me and my team have personally vetted. I'll see you on the next episode.